So this is the Audient signal flow work PDF. And what we're going to be doing in here is I'm going to skip ahead to page 14 in this one to get to the master section so we can look at this master section and work on the worksheet from here. And then on Wednesday, we'll go over all the other stuff for this one, like the signal flow EQs and all that stuff there. But I want to give you some chance to work on this as a group here on Zoom as well. So let's just start with, let's go into here, the master section. I'm going to pull up the worksheet here, and we're going to pull up the manual as well. All right, so if we look on here, this is it's the picture I took of the master section of the Audient. And up here, number 1 here, this is our stereo inputs. Number 2 is our our trim inputs for the recording path from our routing. Sorry, the outputs, not the inputs. And you can find that right here on the bus master trims here. Controls the overall level of a group output. And then down here, number 3, this is our send masters for our sends. And then over here is number 4, this is our studio section. The studio section is what goes to the musicians. So remember, you're the engineer, you're in the control room, and the musicians are in the studio. So there's 2 main rooms when we're dealing with all the stuff that we're working with. The control room is where the engineer lives, that's where you live, and the studio is where the musicians live. That's where the actual recording is going to take place. Number 5 here is our control room guide. So the number 4 is the studio area, and number 5 is the control room area. And in here we've got a couple things, like number 5 specifically is talking about the speakers and their level and the selection there. And number 6 here is for your control room level, the overall level of the main speaker. Number 7 is your oscillator for testing out the room tones, and number 8 is your bus compressor. And down here, this one down here is for your solo section. So when you solo things, how do you listen to that solo section? So let's go in here, let's go into the manual, and let's open up the sheet here. So essentially what's happening is we have the studio section here. Let me just zoom in on this. We have the studio section here, and once again, that's for your musicians. And in the studio, we have 2 things. We have speakers and we have the foldback. Now, not all studios are going to have speakers. Most studios will have headphones, but not all studios will have speakers. So if the studio has a speaker and the speaker is for a speaker, like what you can hear without the headphones on, then we're going to say, what do we want to send to that speaker? There's different places we can send things from. The main one is this one here that says C/RM. That's for control room. The control room is the main place you're going to send the signal out. That's what you're listening to on your main speakers in your control room. So if you want the musicians to hear what you're hearing, you can send them the control room signal. If you want the musicians to hear what the tape is being recorded on the 2-track tape, or so you got 2 of these 2-track tapes for 1 and 2, then they can listen to that as well. It's going to be very unlikely that they're going to want to listen to the 2-track tape. There's not really any reason for them to do that. So they might be listening from the control room, but then down here we have aux A and aux B. Now, let's just back up here for a second and go back in the manual and take a look at this section here. Number 9 on this page here, this is our foldback mix down here. A and B are the foldback mix. And remember, I mentioned that the foldback mix is for your headphones, what the musicians are going to listen to in their headphones. Well, that's where we're at right now. Here, A and B, aux A and B, are for the musicians. So if we want to send them from aux A, and we can turn the levels up in aux A to send them different levels, or aux B to send from aux B. Now, this is a little bit confusing, and later on we're going to get a little bit of a deeper dive into what a headphone mix is. And I think Yeah, not today, but we're going to do a deeper dive in the next couple days into what a headphone mix is. And you should have already talked about that in mod 1, but maybe you didn't get into it too deep, but we are going to get into it deeper. And Staffo says, so the Audient uses tape. No, the Audient doesn't record anything itself. You have to have another piece of gear that's going to record stuff. So the Audient, it doesn't, you can use tape, or you can use digital tape, or you can use a computer to record with the Audient. It doesn't matter what your recording device is. The Audient is a separate piece of the puzzle. The Audient is the mixer that goes before the tape machine or before your recorder. So whatever you have, if you have a tape machine, or if you've got an ADAT machine, or you've got a DAW with your computer, then the Audient can use any one of those things. So it doesn't really matter what you're using to record on, it just matters how you get it to that recording point. And so what this number 4 section is doing is it's like, what are our musicians actually listening to? That's what the musicians are actually listening to, is this down here. And then for each one, we have on or solo. So if you want to turn on the speakers, it's like right below whatever it is. So if you want to turn on, send the signal to the speakers, you can send it from the on section here under speakers. If you want to solo out the if you want to solo out the headphones, like whatever your musicians are listening to, so you can hear what they are hearing, that's what the solo button here is for foldback A and B. So foldback A is the level that gets sent to the musicians, and foldback B is the other one that gets sent to the musicians. So we have two different headphone mixes here. Now, once again, it's going to be much easier to understand what's going on once you're actually in the studio and you can see it happening. So we're going to go over this tomorrow. We're going to go over sending some signal to our musicians, and so they can hear it, and you'll see, oh, that's what it does. Okay, cool. And we can talk about that headphone mix a little bit more with our hands actually on it. And so you'll be working on that tomorrow and Thursday, because remember, we're going into SAE on Tuesdays and Thursdays from now on. All right, so what I would say over here for this part here for the studio section is number 1 is the source select. This chooses the source for the speakers and headphones, like something like that. Number 2 is the level. This is the level for how much you're sending out to the studio. Like that. So it adjusts the level being sent to the studio. And then number 3 is the on switch to send it on. Number 4 is solo. Number 5 is solo for A and B respectively. So not super hard. Just the concepts might be a little bit tricky. All right. Let's go to the next page here. So this is for the control room, and this is what you are actually listening to in the control room. That's what the audio engineer is listening to. So up across the top, we have the source select, then we have our speaker select, then we have our main monitors. Now, you'll see here we have mix, tape 1, tape 2, tape 3. Tape 1, tape 2, and tape 3 are when we're recording on our DAW or whatever we're recording onto. Now, keep in mind, once again, the Audient says tape, but it doesn't have to actually be tape. I know it can be a little bit confusing, but it has to say something. So they just chose for it to say tape. But really what it means is the DAW or something like that. So, yeah, I'm recording this Twitch T. This Twitch is going to be saved, and the other one was already uploaded, so you're going to see it. And the mix is what we are going to be recording probably 95% of the time, or what we're listening to 95% of the time. That's what you're actually, that's your mix. That's your main mix, what the recording is going to be. The tape 1, 2, and 3, these are for the monitor path for the tape machine. It's a little bit hard to understand, but just the main thing I want you to keep in mind is that mix is what you're going to be having pressed down like 95% of the time. Then we have our speaker select, and the speaker select has 3 sections, 3 different parts for our 3 speakers that we can have extra speakers, and then we have our main button here. Now you'll notice the main button does not have a knob. The main button is your main monitor speakers that you're listening to, but you should also have extra speakers. If you have a budget for it, you should have extra speakers in your control room. And the reason why you want to have extra speakers in your control room is because you want to listen on as many different places as possible. So, for example, when I lived in Japan and I was working for the record label, when I would have meetings with the owner of the label, I noticed that he had like a little Sony boombox thing that he would listen to everything. He had really nice speakers in his room, but he would do all his listening on this little Sony thing. And so he would listen to everything, all the demos and everything would come through there. So what I did was I went out and bought the exact same listening device, the exact same boombox from Sony, and I put it in my studio. So I had my nice studio monitors that I liked a lot, but then I also had this little boombox radio that he listened to everything on, because I realized if I want him to like it, I have to make it sound good for him, and he listens to everything on that little boombox. So I would work on the song on my normal studio speakers, and I would enjoy it or whatever, and then before I would finalize my mix, I would listen to it on the little radio thing that he had, and so I could make sure I made it sound exactly like what he was going to listen to. I would hear it exactly how he was going to hear it. And this is what you want to do. You want to listen on a place where you're comfortable, but you also want to listen on something that maybe sounds bad and something that sounds really good, like different ways to listen to stuff so that you can listen many different places to get a good mix all across. So if you have like some speakers that really don't sound that good, like for example, on an iMac, there's mix engineers that listen to all their mixes, like for pop music and stuff. They'll listen on an iMac or on the phone or something like that to test it out, because they know that a lot of people are listening on their phone, on their iMacs, places like that, on their computers, and that's how people listen these days. So it's good to test out your mix on many different places, and that's why you'd have different speaker selects. At SAE, we don't actually have any different speakers in the studios. We just have one set of monitors. So we can't really there's no reason to use this at SAE in New York. But if you have your own studio, I recommend that you would get some different speakers that sound better or worse or something like that. Now you'll notice the main one does not have a knob above it, and that's because the knob for main is right here where it says main monitors. So we go down here, and that's your level for your control room. And that's really where you want to change the level. Don't ever change the level on the master fader. Always change the level on your main monitor. And then we have a button here for mono to make the signal mono. And we have left cut, right cut, which is going to cut out the left and right sides. We have 8 is overall cut, which is just a mute. And then 7 is dim, which just turns the level down in the studio so you can talk and have a conversation, but you can still hear something that's going on. All right. The oscillator section is here. This oscillator section, we can change the frequencies by pushing down a different combination of the buttons, and you can see here it shows you what different ones are. Then we can send the oscillator to the bus or to the mix, the main mix, left and right. We can turn it up and down, and we can turn it on and off. The oscillator is for you when you want to check your speakers, you want to check the room, you want to hear different frequencies in the room, stuff like that. It's just a sine wave. And it's just a really good way just to kind of check and make sure things are working correctly. Number 5 is your solo section. And if we go down here, we'll see here, number 5 here is the solo level. Solo in front alters the ratio of the solo signal to the mix signal, which means that you can adjust your mix and how much you're hearing. So if you want to solo stuff, but you still want to hear some of the music, you can adjust this more towards the mix side of things. So all the way over here on the left-hand side means that your solo is going to be just soloed, and then over to the right is just you're going to hear the mix. So if you want to hear a combination of those, you can adjust that there. It's a really cool feature. It's something that I don't use too much. If I'm soloing stuff, I just solo it. But it's a really cool feature to kind of use. So solo in place switches the console into solo in place mode, which means that the solo signal will replace the mix signal at the stereo output of the console. You do not want to push this down. If solo in place is pushed in, that means that when you hit a solo button, it's going to shift whatever is going to your the mix signal at the stereo output of the console. It depends on how you want to do it. If you want to put it down, I just said you don't want to put it down, but that's up to you really, actually, how you want to do that. And then the select this AFL button or PFL is either AFL or PFL is after fader or pre-fader. So PFL allows pre-fade signals to be auditioned on the monitors and viewed or on the master meters by pressing the solo button. And then AFL allows the post-fade signal to be auditioned on the monitors. So you really want to, it depends on what you're doing. If you're recording, you want it to be PFL. And if you're not recording, you want it to be AFL. So it's something that's, how it's going to be recorded, how it's going to go out to the master, and how we're going to see it like that. So that's your solo section there. The main ones to keep in mind here is the level and the solo and front mix here. Those are the two big ones there. Let's go over here and take a look at this. All right, so if you're looking in here, number 5 is your solo level. And just say sets the level of the solo function. So that's all you really needed to say for that kind of stuff. All right. The compressor. This is a bus compressor, and the main thing to keep in mind about this compressor is that it does not compress an individual channel. It compresses all of the channels at the same time. So any channel that you're hearing through your speakers is going to be going through this bus compressor if you have it turned on, which is the N button here. It basically turns it on. So number 1 here is your gain reduction meter. If the compressor is working, you're going to see that gain reduction meter being hit. Number 2 is your threshold. Number 5 is your makeup gain. Remember, we talked about this stuff before, threshold and makeup gain. This is not the same assignment. This is a new assignment. This is the master section. Before was the channel strip. This is the master section. All right, so number 2 and 5 are really important, the threshold and the makeup gain. And then the ratio is down here, number 4. And there's only 3 settings here for ratio: 2 to 1, 4 to 1, and what is that, 10 to 1 or 15 to 1? I can't really see what it says. 10 to 1. So this ratio knob here is how much compression. The threshold is where it's going to start compressing, like how loud it's going to start compressing. And then your makeup gain is the output. And then of course we have an attack and release. Now this is modeled after the bus compressor, basically after the bus compressor on the SSL. It doesn't sound exactly the same, but it's a good sound. So it's a good thing to use and learn how to use. You can record your bus compressor, but you have to set it up to record in a special way, which we're going to be talking about another time. Okay, but that's your bus compressor there. Next we have our stereo inputs. Now, the 8024 is called the 8024 because it has 80 outputs and 24 inputs. But actually it has a few more inputs here. Or is it the other way around? 80 inputs and 24 outputs. It's probably that way, actually. So here we have multiple inputs here that are stereo, and these do not have any EQ. These are for extra things. So every studio that you've got will have you might have like some radios in there. You might have a place where people can plug in their iPhones, or maybe sound coming out of your computer, something like that. And you want to be able to listen to that without taking up channels on the mixer itself, because remember the mixer only has 24 channels, and those are all mono channels. So if I only have 24 channels, I don't want to take up some of those channels with my computer, or something I'm not going to record, something I just want to listen to. So that's what the stereo inputs are for. Stereo inputs are not necessarily to be recorded, they're for you to listen to things. Now, we can record the stereo inputs. You can see there's a little small routing matrix up here on the top of the stereo inputs. And they all say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, like that, because they are stereo. Everything is stereo. But what's missing from this is the aux sends, except for the foldback mix, and also your EQs. So those do not exist on here, so you cannot EQ on the stereo inputs. If you have something coming into the stereo inputs, like reverb at SAE and In New York, ours is normal to having a reverb come in. So if you want to have it with a reverb coming in, but you want to be able to EQ that reverb at some point, you can actually take this stereo input here and shift the signal to go to one of your inputs on your board using patch cables. We're going to talk about patch cables on another day, not today. We're going to talk about them though. So down here is your level, and up here is your gain. So if you need to turn it up and down, really, you're going to not push this. You're not going to mess with this too much. But your level down here, you will mess with this one, and you're going to turn that up and down. That's your overall level. You can have the mix button here, number 7, which assigns your signal to the mix output. So if you want to mix it in with everything else, you can do that right there. And you got solo and cut. Now, things that these are used for that you would record or you want to have play with everything else would be like your reverb or something like that. So if you want to have the reverb at SAE, you just have to go ahead and turn up number 6 there, and you're automatically going to be hearing reverb if you're sending to the reverb. You don't have to patch anything for, and that's for stereo input number 1 at SAE, New York. So what I might expect for is, something in here would be number 8 would be the stereo input cut solo button. And this just solos the stereo input number 1. Not that hard to understand. Unless it is hard to understand, then let's talk. All right. Over here we have our subgroups, and the subgroups have 2 sections to them, and where we're looking at on the board is, let's see if I can find a picture of where that is. Where's the overall picture of everything? No, okay. So the subgroup section is kind of to the left of the Audient. Here, let's look on my computer here. Let's see. Here we go. Is this? I'm just seeing where it is. Yeah, so let's see if this one will be big enough to show you where it is. Oh, don't open Photoshop. Okay, well here, since Photoshop opened, it's a bit blurry because it's a smaller image, but you can see here, just beneath the master section, the master section we've been talking about is right up here, and then here is are your buses. So that's what we're talking about right down here in this section down here is the buses. Let me quit out of Photoshop. There we go. Let's open this again with preview. Boom. So I'm just going to leave this open right over here in the corner. So each one of these subgroups, which is this section down here, and you're going to see it once we go into school, has a pan and a mix button and a solo or cut, and it has a fader. So it's basically very similar to our long faders, but it's just for our bus sections, just so we can subgroup things together. And again, we're going to be talking about that and diving deep into it in more depth. We haven't really talked about subgrouping too much yet. I did show you a little bit of that last week, but once we start talking about it, then you'll know how to do it on the Audient. So it's important that you know how to do subgrouping in Pro Tools, Logic, Ableton Live, also on the Audient, also on the O2R, on the SSL, things like that. So we will be talking about all this stuff, but we haven't really learned too much about subgrouping quite yet. Then you've got your talkback section here. Talkback section is for communicating to your people in the studio. That's what we want to do. We want to be able to talk to them because that's a sound, it's basically a soundproof room, and you're in another soundproof room. So you want to be able to talk to the people through the glass. The people that you're looking at, you want to be able to talk to them. So that's what this talkback section is for, called communications. So we've got the level here, how loud or soft your voice is going to be. And then you can put here slate. You can talk to all the group outputs. You can SLS, talks through the studio loudspeaker, which is not something you're really going to do too much. And then foldback lets you talk to the foldback outputs. And this is what you're going to be using mostly, is this foldback one here. So you can talk to the foldback place. Okay. So usually it's going to be number 4 that you're going to be talking to. All right. And then we have the aux masters and the bus master trim. So the aux masters are for when you're sending signal to a reverb or something like that. You can adjust the overall level to that reverb. So if you're sending 5 different things to a reverb, 5 different audio signals to the reverb, you might want to turn the whole overall signal level down a little bit so it's not being quite as loud. So what you do is, if our reverb's on aux send number 1, which it is at SAE in New York, so aux send number 1, which might be like this one right here, what I would do is, if my signal is too much going into the reverb, I can just turn this knob down. So everything doesn't need to, I don't need to go through and turn down things individually on the board itself. I can just turn down this master trim level for the sends, and we're good to go there. And all these are the same. So number 1 is all these 3 right here. So it's just, that's the overall level out for that send. And remember that foldbacks A and B are still the same as sends, so they work the same way. Number 2 is a solo button for that send. And number 3 is the link button to combine things together. And there's a couple of those. There's not one for every single one. There's just a few of them. So that's what this is right here. And then number 1 on the master trim section is just, what do each one of these knobs do? All these knobs are exactly the same. They're just for different channels. And basically this is for when you're sending your signal out of the Audient to be recorded into your DAW, if you can turn that up or down, just to make the overall signal a bit louder. Most of the time you're not going to touch this. It's not something you're going to utilize very much, but there it is if you need it. So if you're clipping your input on your DAW for some reason, then you can turn down the bus master trim. But it's not something that you're going to be dealing with all the time. All right, and then we have the master fader. The master fader is not on this worksheet, but the master fader is this one over here, right down here. That's the master fader, and that master fader is going to stay up all the time. In Pro Tools, you're going to have a master fader as well, and that master fader is also going to stay up the entire time. Don't put it down, just leave it up. And this is something we talked about last week, just leaving up that master fader. So just make sure, if you're recording something like that, then you do not want to touch that master fader. If you're making a recording of your 2-track, you do not want to touch that master fader, because it will turn everything down, and it will turn down in your recording as well. Okay, so that's what's going on there with that. And that's everything for this assignment here. And it's all here in the notes as well. And this stuff is written out in the notes. All right, it's all right here, so you can read about all this stuff. And what I want to do now is I want to move back to Zoom. I just wanted to record that, so let me go ahead and stop my recording here.